Hi, I'm Adam Radley. I'm the founder of AIM, and I want to talk about what AIM is and how it impacts every Australian. AIM stands for Australian Independence Movement. We're not a political party and we have no political affiliation, but as the name suggests, we do want Australia to become an independent country and concurrently address some related issues. To be more specific, we want a historic Australian Independence Referendum to be held on the 1st of February 2020 to make Australia an independent country, adopt a new Australian flag, change the date of Australia Day, remove racism from the Constitution, recognise Indigenous Australians as the first Australians. I want to take a few minutes to explain in very simple and succinct language why we need to do this and how we plan to do it. Let's start with becoming an independent country. The first thing you would have noticed on our website is this statement: real democracy, independence and freedom. It implies that Australia is not a real democracy. Some of you might be thinking that this is just a bold statement designed to get attention. If that was true, I wouldn't have started AIM and you wouldn't be watching this video. A real democracy involves voting for politicians that will represent us and our interests in government. And we, the people, always have the final say. Sadly, this is not the case in Australia. After a politician wins their election, the first thing they do is make an oath of allegiance. And this is it, straight from Section 42 of the Constitution. I, John Smith, do swear that I will be faithful and bear true allegiance to Her Majesty Queen Elizabeth II, her heirs and successors according to law. So help me God. The So Help Me God part is optional. The rest is compulsory. This is not a ceremonial statement. It's a legally binding statement. It's also a very clear and unambiguous statement that requires all of our elected officials to prioritise the interests of the Queen and her children over the interests of the Australian people that elected them. During every election, the people running for office tell us what they promise to do if they get elected, and we use this information to decide who we want to vote for. When they get into government and attempt to deliver on their promises by voting for new laws, these new laws cannot become effective until they receive royal assent. It is what it sounds like. The Queen has to decide whether she's okay with this new law. She has the power to accept it, reject it, or amend it. In simple terms, neither the Australian people or our elected officials get the final say. The Queen gets the final say, and all we can do is suggest something to her and hope that she's okay with it. This is one of several reserved powers provided by the Australian Constitution to the Queen and her representative, the Governor-General. Now you might be thinking, well, what other reserved powers does the Queen have? They also include the power to appoint or dismiss ministers or even the Prime Minister. The most notable example of the use of reserved powers was in November 1975, when the Queen's representative, John Kerr, removed Prime Minister Gough Whitlam and all of his government, despite the fact that Whitlam retained the confidence of the House of Representatives. The fact that this happened is irrelevant. The fact that it's possible is the problem. As a result of the reserved powers given to the Queen by the Australian Constitution, you can see that the Queen controls the laws of Australia and all of the members of government in Australia. So her position as Australia's head of state is not ceremonial. She is a real queen, not a ceremonial queen. And when Prince Charles becomes king, he will be the real king of Australia, not a ceremonial king. A very real king that will be the actual, legal, supreme ruler of all of Australia and all of its citizens. So in summary, the Queen has the power to accept or reject any new laws, appoint or dismiss any minister or Prime Minister, and every new member of government must legally commit to prioritising the interests of the Queen and her children ahead of those of the Australian people. We do not have legal control of our own country. We are merely entitled to make suggestions to the Queen, and she will accept them or reject them at her discretion. This is the political equivalent of a kangaroo court. It's stupid, it's embarrassing, and it's going to end. This is why AIM was formed, and this is why we stand for real democracy, independence, and freedom. Now let's talk about solutions. AIM was not established to force our opinions on you. A critical part of our strategy is to allow and encourage all Australians to participate in a collaborative process where we can all suggest and discuss possible solutions. We'll do this on the I Imagine crowdsourcing platform. It allows people to post a problem and ask the community to suggest solutions. Then the community can rate them, comment on them, or suggest new solutions. There's a crowdsource listing for each of the 5 issues in the Australian Independence Referendum, and I encourage anyone that is interested in participating to get involved. You can take a few seconds to rate a solution, or take time to develop a detailed alternative solution, or anything in between. In order to get the process started, I provided my own suggested solutions. The solution to the problem of the Queen holding all of the power and Australian citizens having none is to become a republic, an independent country with an Australian head of state. If we go down this road, we need to decide how we will elect the new head of state and what we want to do with the reserved powers of the Queen and the Governor-General. One thing we need to keep in mind is that Australia currently uses a political system based on the British Westminster system. Although it has several issues, most Australians believe this system has served us well, and changing it would involve massive changes to the Constitution, and that would be very difficult, so in my opinion, we should keep it. My suggestion is to simply make the Prime Minister the Australian head of state. In this scenario, Prime Ministers will be elected in the same way that they are now, and will not receive any new power or have any power taken from them. Given that the technical definition of Prime Minister is the head of government, as opposed to the head of state, we could consider changing the title from Prime Minister to President, but it's just a title. Now, what would happen to the titles, powers, and responsibilities held by the Queen and the Governor-General? I suggest that we abolish all titles held by the Queen and the Governor-General, and that we should assign all powers and responsibilities currently held by the Queen and the Governor-General to the Australian Parliament, where it will utilise its existing parliamentary voting systems to execute these powers and responsibilities themselves, adjust them, or abolish them as it sees fit. Now, if we're going to become a republic, we need to address some related issues. The second item in the Australian Independence Referendum relates to the flag. When we become a republic, we will be the strong, independent country that we all want to be. And we're going to need national symbols that reflect our independence and our true identity, rather than the identity of another country. The joke about the current Australian flag being the British flag at night is both funny and true. This is a little sad because as Australians, we do have a strong identity. It just isn't represented in that flag. So what are the specific problems with the current flag? On days like Australia Day, you'll see people waving 3 different flags: the official flag, the green and gold flag, and the Aboriginal flag. Why? A lot of Australians don't think that the official flag adequately represents them or what they think it means to be Australian. The official flag should be inclusive and use colours and symbols that are uniquely Australian, not colours and symbols from another country. For Indigenous Australians, the official flag represents the invasion of Australia by Britain. There's nothing in the official flag for Indigenous Australians other than painful reminders of history. Red, white, and blue are heavily branded as the colours of the United States, Britain, France, Russia, and many, many other countries. It's the least unique colour combination for a flag in the world, used by more than 35 countries. So what's the solution? I want all Australians to contribute their ideas for a new flag on the crowdsourcing listing. In the meantime, these are my thoughts. The green and gold colours were initially used by the Australian cricket team in 1899 when touring the UK so that they could differentiate themselves from Britain. Interestingly, the first Australian cricket team was all Aboriginal. The colours themselves are said to be based on gumtree green and wattle gold. Both are natively Australian. Green and gold are the colours that we choose when we compete on the national stage in events where national pride matters. The green and gold colours are already a symbol of national pride, and millions of Australians prefer to wave green and gold flags and wear green and gold clothing to represent their Australian identity. There are no significant negative connotations associated with green and gold. Australians have essentially already decided that these are the real Australian colours. But I'm suggesting that we add one more colour, Uluru Red. If you've never heard of Uluru Red, it's because I made it up. But it's easy to figure out what it is, and this is why I think we should use it. Red is present in the current Australian flag, the British flag, and when combined with green and gold, one of these three colours is in the flag of 40 of the top 41 countries from which people emigrate to Australia. It also includes two colours from the Aboriginal flag. These are the colours that unify us. Australians consider Uluru or Ayers Rock to be the heart of the nation. The psychology of red is well established. It represents determination, strength, and passion. This is perfectly aligned with the never give up attitude that is ingrained in Australian culture. As far as I'm concerned, this attitude is a critical part of our identity and must be represented in the flag. To be clear, I'm not simply suggesting green, gold, and red, but more specifically suggesting the colours Gumtree Green, Wattle Gold, and Uluru Red. In my opinion, these colours provide the best representation of our Australian identity, both as it is now and as we aspire it to be in the future. The third issue in the referendum relates to Australia Day. Australia Day has reached a point where it has now been permanently rebranded as Invasion Day. It's been transformed into a day that divides us when it should be a day that unites us. January 26 is a day of mourning for Indigenous Australians. That prevents all Australians from having an uninhibited celebration of something great, being grateful for being Australian. If the current Australia Day doesn't serve Indigenous Australians or the rest of us, then it has to go. This is the 32nd history of Australia Day. Captain Arthur Phillip arrived at Sydney Cove on January 26 in 1788. He raised the British flag and then simply declared that the eastern half of Australia now belonged to Britain. This led to the formal establishment of the colony of New South Wales. Other colonies, meaning states, were founded on different dates. There was never a unified national day for Australia until 1984, when the government created the National Australia Day Committee. So not only is the current Australia Day actually Invasion Day, it's not even Australia Day. It's just New South Wales Day. The selection of January 26 as Australia Day was obviously not properly thought out. So what's the solution? As usual, I want all Australians to contribute their ideas on the crowdsourcing platform, but this is my suggestion. We should move the date of Australia Day to February 1 and rename it Independence Day. And this is why. It would mark the anniversary of the date that Australians vote to become an independent country. It allows Indigenous Australians to use January 26 as a day of mourning. It allows all Australians to have an uninhibited and unified celebration on February 1. 1/2/2020 is easy to remember, and will be a significant and symbolic day for all future generations of Australians. The fourth issue in the Australian Independence Referendum is removing racism from the Australian Constitution. An important part of becoming an independent and unified country is the ongoing process of reconciliation with Indigenous Australians. One of the obstacles to reconciliation is racism in the Constitution. This is the simple summary. Section 25 of the Constitution says that the states can ban people from voting based on their race. Section 51 can be used to pass laws that discriminate against people based on their race. This is obviously unacceptable, and I don't have to waste time explaining why. The solution? Remove these sections from the Constitution. The Constitution is a reflection of who we are and how we want our country to operate, and these sections are not consistent with the views of the overwhelming majority of Australians. But this obvious problem won't fix itself. We have to fix it, and changes to the Constitution can only be made with a referendum. The final issue in the Australian Independence Referendum is recognising Indigenous Australians as the first Australians. Imagine if some foreign people showed up to your country, pushed you aside, then created a new constitution that includes a new set of rules for how the country will operate, and they did all of this without recognising that you ever existed. That's what happened to Indigenous Australians. You might think I'm exaggerating. This is a statement from the former New South Wales Governor, Lachlan Macquarie. All Aborigines from Sydney onwards are to be made prisoners of war, and if they resist, they are to be shot and their bodies hung from trees in the most conspicuous places. It's obviously not possible to turn back the clock, but an ongoing process of reconciliation is necessary if Indigenous Australians and new Australians want to move forward as a strong, unified people. One important part of this process is recognising Indigenous Australians as the first Australians in the Constitution. Recognition can be a statement in the preamble of the Constitution that communicates something to the effect of, Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islanders are the first Australians. They were the original inhabitants of the land, and their cultures have existed on this land for tens of thousands of years. The Constitution provides a framework for all Australians from all backgrounds to coexist in an environment of mutual respect and prosperity. The specific language for recognition should come from the Indigenous community and not from me. I hope you can see that we need to take legal control of our own country, and we need to be able to elect members of government that prioritise our interests. The only way to do this is to become an independent country. We need a flag that unites us. We need to change the date of Australia Day so that we can have a full-throated celebration of what it means to be Australian, and let Indigenous Australians use January 26 as a day of mourning. We must remove racism from the Constitution, and we need to recognise Indigenous Australians in the Constitution. These are serious issues, and your vote on this referendum will say something about who you are as an individual and who we are as a nation. For the sake of clarity, we're not proposing an all-or-nothing referendum. If any one of these issues gets a yes vote, then it becomes effective. So that's it. I'm guessing that the revelation that Australia is not a real democracy and has a constitution that allows racism is probably going to be a shock for many Australians. That's because these issues have been swept under the rug for a very long time. Now it's time for these issues to be brought out into the open and addressed once and for all. We cannot be the generation that is aware of all of this and decides to let it stand. I also hope that I've made the case that the system really is broken and we have to fix it. Check out the website. It includes more detail about what, why, how, and when, as well as listing multiple ways to get involved. If you're watching this video before March 28, 2017, come out and join us for our launch in Federation Square in Melbourne. The event will include some great Aussie performers that you might not have heard of, and yes, I will have more to say when I speak at the event. For now, I look forward to seeing you on the road to 1/2/2020.